Everyone, and welcome. Dominic here, your host with SmartCatholics Mastermind, and I'm excited to be joined by Ann Garrido. Garrido, how do you pronounce your name, Ann?
Yeah, Garrido.
Garrido, welcome. Good to have you. So Ann is the author of Rules of Engagement: 8 Christian Habits for Being Good and Doing Good Online. She's also the associate professor of homiletics. And what was the university there?
I'm at Aquinas Institute of Theology in St. Louis, Missouri.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So very quickly here, Smart Catholics Mastermind is a live series to meet the hearts and minds of our creators, the leaders and hosts in the community. They devote their time and talent to mastering their vocation so that you can live a fuller life faster. So Ann, before diving into talking about you and your work and your writing, can you take us to a moment in your life, a short story about yourself? In particular, was there a moment where you began to realize you couldn't stay the same? You had to change maybe who you were, what you were doing. Perhaps it was a deeper call into who you are today.
Yeah. So I grew up in a really large Catholic family. I'm the oldest of 8, and we were one of those families that was always like in the front pew on Sunday morning. And I remember being at about, I don't know, I was probably about 12 or so, and it was the Feast of Pentecost. And I remember kind of listening to the story of the day around how these disciples who had been frightened, they were all gathered together in one space, and the Spirit swept through there, and they were lit on fire with God. They went out, they preached, everybody, 5,000 people were baptized, turned over their lives to God, and then in my imagination, everybody lived happily ever after. And I should say my dad was an accountant, so he would come home at the end of the day, and he just seemed to have kind of like, I don't know, hard stories about things that were going on in the workplace and budgets and things not adding up and human resource issues. And I remember thinking to myself, even at the age of 12, well, I'm going to go work for the church, because that's the place where people live happily ever after.
Where the happy people are.
So I started working for the church even maybe around the age of like 14. I was the after school receptionist at our parish center and stuffed bulletins and so forth. And very quickly I learned, like, we had 4 priests at that time. They didn't all have exactly the same ecclesiology, or the gym was regularly getting double booked, or the dishwasher, nobody in the parish thought that they owned emptying it. And probably the climax of my early church career was when I was, about 18. It was the night of Easter Vigil. And at the back door, there was this furious ringing of the doorbell at the parish center. And I ran down, and there one of our elderly parishioners was sitting there, and he goes, "The school's on fire." And as a kid, I was like, oh my gosh. So, I mean, really long story short, the building didn't burn down or anything like that, but really long story short, there had been some tension on the parish staff, and one of the facilities people on our staff was upset about the fact that that there was some restructuring going on that could impact his job. And he lit a bucket of oily rags on fire in the basement of the school. And I remember standing that night, Dominic, long story short, it did impact his job, right? Like, he's no longer with his parish staff. But I remember standing there in the middle of all this thinking, like, wow, we've come a long way from the book of Acts. We got to do something differently here. And at the time, it made me really kind of discouraged about life in church. Like, this isn't what I thought was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And it was more like when I started studying the letters of Paul, when I got into graduate school theology, and recognized that there's always been tension in the church, and that tension's not necessarily a bad thing, but that tension actually could be constructive. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's a good transition point. That was the moment when I woke up and realized something's got to change. But it was a little bit later in life when I began to realize what could change and how could I be part of the solution.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yes, I heard of your book then, which is perfect segue here. About a year ago, I think you published it, and I found an article of yours where you were summarizing it, and the 8 Christian habits for being good and doing good online, rules of engagement. And I remember seeing that, and I immediately grabbed it and thought, this is incredible. And of course, I want to meet you and introduce you to the Smart Catholics community, because I also, in a similar way, came from a Christian ecclesiology, a background that was extremely divisive, extremely elitist, and there was no common connection to the faithful people of God, as Pope Francis calls them. And his insights that I think you've turned into this book, where Pope Francis, celebrates tension can be a good thing as long as it's constructive. Then the Holy Spirit's in play. So walk us through that. Well, what was the inspiration then for your book after, I guess, that fire in a basement moment? And what is it you're doing with yourself these days?
Yeah. So I would say even when I was a teenager, I already was just in my mind, always turning around and around this question of how could tension in the church actually be a powerful in our community? It's kind of interesting. I've been interested in the research of John Gottman and his wife, who've done some stuff on healthy marriage, and recognized that in the healthiest marriages, about 1 out of every 5 interactions actually is a tense interaction. And my suspicion is that, and what they say is that, if the ratio is higher than that, that's not good for your marriage. But also if the ratio is lower than that, if you're in a marriage that never has tension, oftentimes what you find is that it's not because it's just the couple's gone apathetic. They're not talking with each other anymore about what's important to them. And I think similar things could be said about the church community. Probably for those of us who are in ministry and alive and active within our church communities, we should expect if we're in a healthy community, about 1 in every 5 interactions is going to be a tough interaction, because people only argue about the stuff they care about. And if nobody in your community is arguing about anything, often it's an indication that they've gone apathetic. So when you're trying to wake a church up and make it more alive, as Dominic, I know you're trying to do in the world, I think one of the things we should expect when we're trying to do that is that it's natural when we're passionate about our faith. It's natural when we're trying to evangelize and be a more public witness in the world, that tension's going to be part of it. And so for me, I don't want to see the building burn down, right? My ministry, if you want to say right now, is really about equipping us who are active within the church to make sure that we're handling those tense conversations in a really productive and constructive way that can actually build up community rather than tear it apart. So for myself, throughout my career as an educator, it's someone who's ended up teaching pastoral theology and teaching communications or homiletics preaching. That's been a thread all the way through there. I had the privilege a couple of years ago of getting involved with some members from the Harvard Negotiation Project and trying to figure out what's the best research that's been done on managing tough conversations and negotiation well, and then how could we apply that to church life. So I wrote a book called Redeeming Conflict on that topic. And then for myself, I just recognized more and more of the tension in our church nowadays is going on online. So how would we begin to apply some of that research to Christian conversation online on social media? And that's where my most recent work has been. Yeah.
Fantastic. What's been the reception on the book in the past year, I think now?
I think good. Yeah, I think it has struck a chord because it's something that so many of us face in our daily lives. And a lot of us go up on social media for lots and lots of different reasons. I mean, some of us are up on social media with an intention to explicitly try to evangelize in that space. I think there's other ways to evangelize besides that. I don't think that needs to be why you're on social media. But if you're on social media at all, whether you're trying to evangelize or not, what does St. Francis says? Preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words. Just the way that you're showing up in this platform matters a whole lot. And I think all of us, whether explicitly evangelizing or not, can hold ourselves to some basic rules of accountability. If we profess to be Christian, there's certain things we got to do when we show up there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. I'll put a link to your book in the show notes. So it was Rules of Engagement: 8 Christian Habits for Being Good and Doing Good Online. So it's. I think it's something that everybody should. I'd love to have you back to continue, digging into that, with our community. But let's transition into the next question. One of the big themes that we've been trying to work with and wrestle with and live out in the Smart Catholics community is the idea of being a first responder. And for those who are just watching this for the first time, or maybe for yourself, it's a bit of a funny word because it is lifted straight out of a medical dictionary. But it's the idea of breaking the bystander effect, which is that sense of apathy that if nobody's doing something, I don't have to start either. So Pope Francis has described the church as a field hospital. And since the church then ministers to us, and then we're called to then minister to the world, with the church, we're then that frontier to friends and family. So with that little bit of an outline there, what I'm curious is what comes to your mind as you hear that idea, and what's your way of living that out, and your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I love that image of the first responder as a metaphor, because for me, what a first responder does is that sometimes they're willing to go into situations that other people might want to avoid naturally. And I think so many of us, like for me, conflict, by nature, I am not a person who likes conflict. I mean, I'm really like I like peace. I don't want confrontation. And so for myself, a lot of what I do is a conversation with myself around just like, Ann, okay, you're going to have to stoke some courage here, because there's a situation in which you might not have all the answers. You're not going to be able to fix the situation, but you might need to be willing to go where nobody else wants to go. And when I think of like a firefighter or someone's on the police force, that they're willing to go into some situations that others might avoid. And for me, I'm trying to call up the courage to keep doing that in daily life. And for me, that zone is going into places where sometimes people might be angry or frustrated, and seeing, can I be a healing presence here?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. No, because there's a million of them happening around us all the time, and your parish priest or your local catechist, your deacons just can't. They're not trilocating yet to meet the demand, but all of us in the pews, that is our call, is to be there and doing that. So wrapping up here then, Anne, if you had 1 minute to share your message with the world, what would you say?
I think that what we proclaim about Jesus is that Jesus' mission in the world is one of reconciliation, and that's not something that we're just supposed to talk about. It's something that we're supposed to actually do, and that requires that we actually equip ourselves to be able to do it, to be able to study in this field, what are the best practices about how to de-escalate conflict in the world? What are the best practices about showing up as a peaceful and a nonviolent presence in the world? And that making sure that for each of us, that's one of the most critical skill sets that we develop in ourselves if we want to be a public presence in the world today.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Well, thank you. I love this.
Dominic.
And that was great. And for those who watch this live or who are catching the replay afterwards, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your one friend that you think would really like to see it. And then maybe come and regroup with us in the free Catholic community on SmartCatholics.com. We're free of trolls and ads and toxicity. We are faithful to the Holy Father, Pope Francis, and the Church. We are committed to a culture of kindness and learning. Does that sound like you? Well, come on over and join us. Thanks again, Anne. And for everybody, God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, Dominic.